Agnes at the Ball. Written by Katie B. Turner. Read by Jenna Pekny. Agnes was always a lively and charismatic person, but she especially came alive at parties and balls. She was not flighty or silly, as so many of her friends. She simply adored the opportunities afforded by these grand events to, frankly and openly, admire other women. They all came to these events to be admired. After all, swanning through the door in their best jewels, wearing fine fabrics whose textures begged to be touched. Laced corsets created perfect silhouettes, and full skirts on top of layers of petticoats further accentuated their tiny waists as their breasts heaved out of their necklines, an aspect of the day's fashion of which Agnes was especially fond. The women's slender necks trailed down to delicate collarbones, glimmering with gemstones. She loved to see all of these women indulge in beauty, and to be allowed to indulge in them, if only from afar. If she was not careful and has too much champagne, her fingers might linger too long on a neckline, or she might stare too intently into a friend's eyes, letting her hunger show. She does her best to remain guarded while still enjoying the night's offerings, hiding behind her fan, yet aware of every action. It is something she is good at, this control. Agnes prides herself on hiding her desire. She doesn't fully understand what she feels, but is wise enough to know it is a part of life that belongs only in dreams, never to manifest in her waking world. There has been a time or two, the barest of fleeting moments, when she thought her best friend Jean might feel the same, might be squeezing her arm more tenderly than usual, or might be letting her hand stay a breath too long when brushing a hair from Agnes's eyes. Each time, Agnes looked at Jean, searching for something in her eyes. Each time, she found nothing, and so abandoned her hopeless thoughts, thinking it must be the projection of her own desire reflecting back at her. If not for Danae, her loneliness might overwhelm her. The child came soon after her marriage to Sebastian. She was glad not to be expected to share his bed during her pregnancy, and even more glad when he did not ask her to return to it after Danae's birth. She thought perhaps he was as relieved as she was that they had done their duty and so might be free of it. He seemed content enough to spend time with her otherwise, and always treated her well and saw that her needs were met. Her friends and relations often wondered aloud when another child might be on its way. She always answered, "When God sees it fit to provide one," a secret smile tugging at her lips. Having only one child bothered Agnes not at all. Danae filled her heart with more love than she thought she had the right to. She was perfectly content with that. It was the delight of her life to spend her days chasing Danae in the garden, reading books to her under the oak tree, teaching her mathematics and Latin. Only 10 years old, and yet Danae was a bright student, with a head for facts and an endless stream of questions. Agnes refused to hire a governess. Why would she give up this precious time with her daughter, when she could educate Danae herself? Sebastian supported her in this, and often joined them. If it couldn't be true love between them, Agnes was glad they could still enjoy being a family. Sometimes, when Jean spent the afternoon with them, they would play dolls with Danae. Jean and Agnes would pretend to be mommy and daddy to Danae's dolls, with Danae voicing the dolls. It was not unusual for hours to fly by as they indulged in these domestic fantasies. Tonight was Mrs. Thornton's midsummer ball. Agnes tucked Danae into her tiny child's bed before leaving for the ball. Danae reached up to touch the chandelier earrings that hung down as Agnes bent over her. "They're like starlight, Mother, raining down from the sky," Danae said, her voice heavy with sleep. "When you see a falling star, you are supposed to make a wish," Agnes said. Danae thought seriously about this for a moment. "I wish Daddy was a girl too, like you and me and Jean, so we could all play with dolls together," she finally said. "Wouldn't that be marvelous?" Agnes agreed, smiling warmly. "Wish hard enough and perhaps it will come true. Now, go to sleep, darling, and I shall tell you all about the ball in the morning. Be sure to remember all the dresses. I like it when you tell me about the dresses." "I will, sweetheart. Good night now." Agnes softly closed the door to her daughter's room. and went upstairs to meet Sebastian in the hall, her mind already lost in the thoughts of the delicious sights that awaited her. She was not to be disappointed. All around the vast room, women hung off the arms of men like dew off of petals, opalescent, shining, making everything around them more subtly beautiful and fine. Not for the first time, Agnes thought of how the men's simpler, monochromatic clothing set off the assets of the women they escorted more brilliantly than if they had stood alone. Agnes tucked herself into a comfortable corner with a glass of champagne, taking small sips, allowing her eyes to roam freely across the crowd. Jean would no doubt arrive soon. What color would she wear tonight? Silver for a moonlight glow? Or dusty pink to complement her blonde hair? She did not have to speculate long. Her eyes landed on Jean, softly beautiful in her favorite shade of pink. As Agnes's gaze shifted to the person on Jean's arm, she felt something in her go still. This was a woman she had never seen before, but whom she found instantly compelling. Her sturdiness made her stand out. She had strong arms and tanned skin, and seemed to radiate health and well-being. Her skin was easily 3 shades darker than the pale men and women that surrounded her. It was clear that this person, whoever she was, spent a great deal of time outdoors, enjoying plenty of exercise. She was dressed in a cunning gown of amethyst brocade with cream accents, a perfect complement to her sun-kissed skin. But it wasn't her attractive form or her clothes that made Agnes do what she did next. It was the mischief in her smile and the way her eyes flashed when her gaze locked with Agnes's own. Spellbound, Agnes found herself heading across the room towards her. Jean spotted her as she approached. "Agnes! There you are! Come here immediately. You must meet Corinne Layton. She's visiting from New York and staying with Mrs. Crandall. They came over for tea this morning and I adore her already." Jean's eyes shone as she guided Agnes to where Corinne stood. Within moments, Agnes was standing within arm's reach of Corinne. Up close, the woman was even more captivating. The almost invisible lines at the corners of her eyes and mouth suggested a great deal of time spent smiling or laughing. Agnes saw the lips curve into a smile as Jean made the introductions. Only after a nudge from Jean did Agnes realize that she had missed the cue to curtsy in greeting. So intently had she been studying Corinne's face. "I'm so pleased to meet you, Miss Layton," Agnes murmured, casting her eyes down to hide her embarrassment. "Corinne, please," she said, placing a hand on Agnes's arm. "And may I call you Agnes? I feel we are to be great friends and have no need for these formalities." Corinne's unexpected boldness made Agnes laugh loudly in surprise. She was delighted and shocked at the same time, searching the faces of those around them for a sign that they had overheard. "Well," Agnes answered, "as you are our guest here, I am obliged to make you feel welcomed. So, Corinne and Agnes it is." With a triumphant smile, Corinne grabbed Agnes's hand. "If I may beg one more indulgence," she said. "It seems the women outnumber the men, and I long to dance. Will you be my partner?" Agnes hesitated. It was certainly not unheard of for 2 women to dance together when the numbers were uneven, but she knew that Mrs. Thornton carefully balanced her guest list, and surely there were eligible male partners enough for all the young women. The glint in Corinne's eye, however, made her forget about Mrs. Thornton and the men in the room. "It would be my pleasure," Agnes said, and allowed Corinne to lead her to the dance floor. Thinking back on this dance afterwards, Agnes would never be able to recall the music or the steps. She would only remember the swirl of cream and amethyst, flashes of Corinne's smile, and the thrill she felt when their palms pressed together. It was clear to Agnes that Corinne was not dancing with her for sheer diversion. The way she gazed at her while they moved was so intense that Agnes knew, this time, It was not her own desire merely reflecting back at her, or a game of pretend with dolls. She was the target of someone else's passion. The realization made her blood sing. She felt her careful control melting into oblivion. Before she knew it, the music had ended, and Corinne was pulling her hand again, this time towards French doors that led to the terrace. In moments, they were outside, the music muffled in the sounds of crickets, filling the night air. "Thank you for the dance. But before she could finish, Corinne put her fingers on Agnes's lips and stopped her words. "Please, let me speak. I knew as soon as I saw you, Agnes, standing apart. The way you looked at the others while appearing not to. Your hunger as you drank in the sweet spectacle in front of you. It is a hunger that I share, and I know it well. When I see it in another, often it is of no consequence to me. I observe it, but feel only a small satisfaction that I am not alone with this. But in you, Agnes, you have hardly spoken 10 words to me, and yet I feel I know you. I feel I want to know more of you. You have no reason to trust me, I know that. But I must ask, will you slip away with me? We can find somewhere and spend a few hours together and allow ourselves to be ourselves for one night." Agnes could not speak. Did she dare just this once to do more than watch from afar? She searched Corinne's face and saw a raw mixture of hope and fear, the same emotions that were rampaging through her own body. In answer, she closed the small distance between them and whispered in Corinne's ear, "There's an empty cottage at the bottom of the yard where servants used to sleep before permanent quarters were built inside. We can be alone there." This time it was Agnes who took Corinne's hand, leading her into the night. An hour or so later, a handful of minutes that had seemed both to stretch forever and to be over in an instant, they lay tangled in borrowed sheets, a sliver of moonlight through a small window illuminating the curves and planes of their bodies. Corinne drowsed beside Agnes. For a few moments, Agnes tried to memorize the sight of her, to etch every line and shadow into her memory. It was a dream come true, but it was time to awaken. With a reluctant sigh, she reached over and gently nudged Corinne awake. "We must return to the ball, Corinne. Surely people will look for us." Corinne kissed Agnes softly in response. Then they rose from the bed. They helped each other climb back into their petticoats and corsets, smoothing down the fabric of their delicate dresses as best they could. They pinned up each other's hair where it had come loose. All of this happened in silence, each enjoying the intimacy of these simple actions. On the walk back, they chatted idly about Corinne's life in New York, about Danae and her education. They did not speak about when Corinne would return home, or anything else related to what lay beyond this night. A rush of sound and light washed over them when they re-entered the ballroom. They shared one final glance, and without speaking, headed in different directions. For the rest of the evening, they were like two planets, orbiting each other from afar, each tethered by the force of the other's gentle pull. Agnes lingered in bed the next morning, longer than usual. On any other day, she would have rushed downstairs to share the details of the night with Danae. Today, she lay still, reliving each moment with Corinne in the cottage as best she could. Some aspects of the night were flashes of light and sound. Others were crystal clear. As the sun moved across the room, she knew she could linger no longer. She did her best to leave her reverie, thinking instead of what she could remember of the night to tell her daughter. Agnes found she would have to invent some details, for she could only really remember one dress, one person, one woman, Corinne. As the weeks passed, the memory became a dream, unreal, distant. Agnes returned to admiring and desiring from afar. Her time with Corinne was not something she could afford to indulge in again, she told herself. What would have happened if they had been discovered? She felt a pain in her stomach when she thought of it now. One day, however, while setting up the dolls with Danae in anticipation of a visit from Jean, Sebastian appeared, bearing a thick envelope. "This has just arrived, darling. It looks like an invitation. And knowing how much you love parties, I thought it best to bring it to you straight away," he said, handing it to her. Agnes turned it over to see the return address, and her breath stopped. It read, "Corinne Layton, 25 Park Avenue, New York, New York." Trying to steady her hand, she gently opened the envelope. A simple but elegant invitation lay inside, begging for her attendance at the fall gala hosted by the Layton family in 2 months' time. Agnes put down the doll she was holding and turned to her daughter. She felt her smile widen as she looked up at Danae and said, "Darling, how would you like to visit New York?" The end.